journal the word of the Bible. So it's really helpful to write notes, as you can see, as you're reading. So easier to meditate on the word of God this way. So I want to start with teaching you a little prayer from the Psalms. It is just a verse from Psalm 119, and it says, "Open my eyes that I may see wondrous things from your law." Can we say it together? Open my eyes that I may see wondrous things from your law. Can you say it louder? Open my eyes that I may see wondrous things from your law. We need to pray this. It's a good prayer to pray before every time we read the Bible, because we really need God to enlighten us, to open our eyes, as we see here in the psalm that we're about to read. So our church teaches us, I'm sure with every time that you pray at Bea, our church teaches us to start prayer with what? With thanksgiving, right? And that's been a helpful practice, for me, because otherwise I would just be like a bulldozer going straight to what? Like requests, prayer requests, needs, all of that. I think, we're likely to just stand in front of God and say, please this, please that, please so-and-so, please, So it's been helpful for me to just, no matter what, kind of set of mindset I'm in, is to start with Thanksgiving. And it's true that once we start with Thanksgiving, we just start to remember so many of the Lord's blessings, and that helps to set our heads straight. But when we look at the Psalms, we see that David doesn't necessarily follow that order. He doesn't necessarily always follow that order. And the psalm that we're about to talk about today is an example of that. And we're going to see there's about 3 psalms, and we're going to compare them today, that have the same kind of pattern. And they don't start with praise. They start out with David pouring out his heart in front of God. And then as he prays, there's like a turning point that happens and that he experiences. I'm not saying which one is the right way, to do it. But I'm just saying, when we look at the Psalms, we see that there is no rhyme or reason for how David does it. He just puts himself before God and tells him whatever is on his heart. So sometimes Psalms start with, "I will sing of the mercies of the Lord forever. With my mouth I will make known your faithfulness." And then other times, like this one, he starts with what? How does Psalm 13 start? "How long, O Lord, how long, how long? How long, how long, how long?" There's other psalms that start with why. "Why have they increased those who trouble me?" Or "how? For do not rebuke me in your anger." And those have a name. They're called Psalms of Lament. Have you ever heard that word? Are you familiar with that word? Lament. What does lament mean? Grief. What else? This is important to know because, believe it or not, there are around 65 Psalms of Lament. Out of how many? How many Psalms are there? How many Psalms, guys? Come on, deacons should know this. What's the psalm that we always sing during communion? 150. Yeah. So that's the last one. So out of 150 psalms, they say there's about 65 psalms of lament. So that's almost half of the psalms. Lament is a form of prayer with the intent of drawing close to God in times of great suffering and pain. So lament is a form of prayer with the intent of drawing close to God in times of great suffering and pain. One of those psalms, written by David, was quoted by Jesus himself on the cross. Anybody know which one? Yeah. Say it out loud. Be bold, be confident. Anybody know? Do you know even the verse that was quoted? My God, why have you forsaken me? So anytime you hear why, that's lament. So my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's from Psalm 22. So that was written by David and quoted by Jesus himself on the cross. Other Psalms are Psalm 3, 13, 22, 38, 42, 44, 55, 57, 60, 89, among others. So, what do you think about the idea of going to God and just kind of dumping on him, venting to him our complaints, our suffering, our anger, our anguish, our confusion? What do you think about that? Have you been taught that that's a good thing or a bad thing or what? Is this how we talk to God? There's a lot of smiles today, but nobody's saying anything. It's okay to do that? Yeah? So we don't actually know what was happening in Psalm 13. We don't know what was happening to David, but what we do know about David's life is David was on the run for his life, a fugitive from Saul for about how many years? About 13 years. From the time that he killed Goliath and Saul went from kind of love bombing David, he loved David a lot and made him like a commander in his army and all of that. And he then, once people started celebrating David and saying, Saul killed, 1,000, but David killed 10,000, right? Or something like that. I'm not good with numbers. Once they started hailing David more than Saul, then Saul turned against him and started being out to kill him. And so within, really quickly, David went from losing his position as commander of the army to Saul went after him in his own home with Michal, who was Saul's daughter. So David jumped and left his home. So he lost his home, his position, his home, his wife. Later on, he goes running to Samuel, and then Saul finds out, and so he comes to him. Samuel was his spiritual father, and so he runs from Samuel, leading the comfort of his spiritual father. He goes to Jonathan, his best friend, and then they're not allowed to see each other again because Jonathan has to kind of take his dad's side, and so they part ways until kind of lastly he ends up in enemy territory, and they get threatened by him. It's a Philistine territory, and they say, "Hey, isn't this the one who killed Goliath?" And so he starts acting like he's crazy and frothing at the mouth, and basically he loses his self-respect. It was kind of like the last thing to go. And he went through all of this for about 13 years. A lot of the songs of lament that came out of pain and anguish were written by David during that time. So we're talking about from the age of about 17 when he killed Goliath until he became king at the age of 30. Now, before he had killed Goliath, he was actually ordained a king. So he was ordained a king by Samuel. So just imagine you're ordained a king, you're anointed a king by God, and then the reality of your life is proving to be completely different. He would say things like, I'm a worm. I am, he was hiding in caves. Had no security, could not sleep at night. The promise of God was not translating to what he envisioned. The reality of his life was different from what God told him would happen. And so, what did he do? He wrestled with God. What do we do when we are in pain and anguish? What do we do when we are suffering? What do we do when God's promises are not showing up, in our lives. When we lose a friend to betrayal, or we lose a friend to death. When we're struggling with addiction, or we're struggling with depression, or we're struggling with anxiety. When parents at home are chronically fighting. When there is no love at home. When I can barely make it financially. When I lose my job. Or when I'm applying and not getting anything. And we say, God, you promised me something different. You promised me, blessing. You said that I'm your child. But we don't feel so blessed. At those times, what do? Do we go to God with our pain, or do we shut down and we start avoiding God because we're disillusioned, we're jaded? Or do we just go through the motions of worship, but kind of like our heart is kind of cold and dead inside? What do? I want everybody to you don't have to say it out loud, but just think about what you do. So here we have an example of what David did. So if you open up to Psalm 13, if you have it, he says, "How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever?" Sometimes it's written as two sentences. How long, O Lord, and then will you forget me forever? And sometimes it's written as one. How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul? Or in another translation, it's how long will I wrestle with my thoughts? In Psalm 10, Psalm 10 verse 1, he says, "Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble?" Anybody feels like God is hiding when you're in trouble? Can't see you, can't hear you, can't feel you. David says it, openly. The problem is not you. He says, "Why do you stand off, O Lord? Why do you stand afar off, O Lord? Why do you hide in times of trouble?" This is from Psalm 10, another psalm of lament. So I want you to look at this psalm. It's only 6 verses. And look at and tell me, how many parts do you see it broken up into? Should I move out of the way? How many parts do you see it broken up into? 3. Okay. So, can you put a title to each of them? How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long shall I take counsel in my soul, having sorrow in my heart daily? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? The next part says, "Consider and hear me, O Lord my God, enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death, lest my enemy says I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved." And the last part says, "But I have trusted in your mercy, my heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me." Anybody notice anything strange about this psalm? What's the pattern here? What's the connection between the 3 parts? Nathan.
He starts off by, kind of like, not reprimanding, but asking God, like, "Why have you forgotten me?" And then in the middle part, he asks for help. And then towards the end, he realizes and he trusts in God. So he can begin by, asking God why he forgot about him, but then later on recognizes the power in God and says, "I trust in your mercy."
Mm-hmm. That's it, right? That's it? So this is one of the things we should be doing when we read the Bibles. The first part is observe. Observe and see what you notice. Like in this part, we observe that it's like broken up into 3 parts. And then we notice the theme and the change in the tone of his prayer and his emotion. It went from venting, complaining to God, to pleading with God and putting his request before him, and then praise. with praise. Like I said, not every psalm starts this way, but we see the same pattern in a couple of other psalms that we're going to read. The question here is, what has changed what has made David go from complaint to praise? There's another psalm in Psalm 142 where he says, take my soul out of prison. He feels like he's so trapped. He feels like he's so mahnu, as they say in Arabic. So he says, so we call the psalm from prison to praise. He says, how long will I wrestle with my thoughts? What kind of thoughts do you think he's wrestling with? What kind of thoughts do you wrestle with when you're in pain and suffering? How long will my enemy be exalted over me? Who's his enemy? He had a specific enemy, which was for the most part, it was Saul, depending on when this was written. So he had specific enemies. What is our enemy? How do we interpret this? How do we apply this? Who's our enemy? Satan, yes. We, as Christians, as believers, we have one enemy, and that is Satan. So when I apply this to my life, how long will my enemy be exalted over me? When would our enemy be exalted over us? When is our enemy exalted over us? When is Satan exalted over us? When is my enemy winning? When?
I said when we stop going to God for help.
So when he separates us from God, when he turns us against God, when else is our enemy victorious over us? When he puts doubts in our minds, David says this a lot in the psalm, that people are telling him, where is your God? And they say he trusted in him, let him deliver him, which they told Jesus later. And so he basically says that his enemy is gloating over him. And that's what Satan does with us when we start to get separated from God, or we turn against God. And we either, blame God for everything, or we lose our faith in him. He says, having sorrow in my heart daily. Where do we go when we are having sorrow in our hearts? Daily. David goes to God. Other examples of people who went to God when they were kind of in the pit. Who are other people that went to God when they were in the pit? Of pain, of suffering, of despair. This is a Bible study, right? You guys? Jonah, okay? He's not one of the biggest ones, because he had a specific gripe with God, but absolutely he did. He shook his fist at God when he was upset about how God handled this whole Nineveh thing, and he ends up telling God, take my life. My life is my death is better than my life. Who else? Job. Yes, who said Job? Okay. So Job lost quite a bit, and so he had a lot to vent about. He had a lot of pain, he had a lot of suffering. He lost his kids, he lost his health, he lost his possessions, and he was just in constant pain, where he was in pain no matter what position he was in. And on top of all of that, he had the emotional pain of having people's beliefs around him, or his friends, basically tell him that, you're sinful, and this is happening to you because you're bad. This is happening to you because of your own sin. So they kind of added insult to injury. He was already hurting, and then they told him, you're hurting and it's your fault. So they blamed him for all the pain. That was Job. And so Job spoke pretty sternly to God. He went, to God and said, like, tell me why you're, contending with me. Come down here and talk to me. He really spoke really, really boldly and really kind of pushed the line of disrespect, with God. And yet, ironically, at the end of his trial, God tells his friends what? God reprimands who? Yeah, he reprimands his friends, not him. And he tells them, my servant Job spoke justly. How did he spoke justly, God? And he said all kinds of really almost blasphemous things. How did he speak justly? What did God like about Job's approach? Job did what David did. He took it up with God. He prayed to God. He didn't vent to others about him. He didn't stop speaking to him. He went to him. And at the end of this whole trial, God has a face-to-face, with him, or heart-to-heart, and starts to tell him, although Job asked a lot of why questions. Why this, why that, why this, why that? God didn't respond by explaining anything to him. God just responded and said, where were you when I did this and this and this and this? Where were you when I created, the heavens and I put limits to the ocean and all of that? What was God saying? What was God saying? I'm God and you are you. And you may never understand, but just trust that I am God and I know what I'm doing. And Job was content with that. At the end, of course, seeing, like God coming through for him at the end, Job ends up seeing with the hearing of the ears, my ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. I know that my Redeemer lives, and in the end he will stand on the earth. Though my flesh it be destroyed, yet with my eyes I will see God. He fought it out with God. He took it to God. And the result was that his eyes were open to more of God and more of God's glory and more of God's power. So we go back to our song and we go to the second part that says, consider and hear me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes lest I sleep the sleep of death. What is David asking for when he says, enlighten my eyes? Abuna had us pray a little prayer at the end of our prayer time that said, open the eyes of my heart. Anybody know where that verse comes from? Enlighten my eyes. Let me say a little bit about depression first, since I'm a therapist. Depression, I explain to my clients, is like wearing dark sunglasses. It makes a person see everything dark. It makes you see yourself dark. It makes you see God dark, like God is either bad or God is not there. It makes you see others dark. No one is there for me, and everyone is fake, and nobody cares about me. It makes you see the future dark. That's why you feel hopeless. Makes you see yourself dark. That's why you feel worthless. This is what depression does to a person. It makes your eyes dark. It makes your world dark. And so here David is saying, enlighten my eyes. Give light to my eyes. And for us to know what that means and what God giving light to our eyes as only He can, we need to go to that verse where St. Paul says, may the eyes, in Ephesians 1, 17 to 19, he says, I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened, in order that you may know the hope to which He has called you, the riches of His glorious inheritance in His holy people, and His incomparably great power for us who believe. What do we get when we stand before God? He opens our eyes. He gives light to our eyes. What does He make us see? He makes us see hope. That you may know the hope to which He has called you. To know that you are called to something so much bigger than anything here that you are upset about. The riches of his glorious inheritance. To know that you are so rich beyond anything here that you can possibly lose. Or even when you feel like whatever you have is not enough. That God has given you riches, a glorious inheritance in his holy people and his incomparably great power for us who believe. When we stand before God and we feel like we're not getting answers and we're saying how long and how many times do I need to ask, and God, where are you? This is what we get instead. We get hope. We get an eternal perspective in our suffering and pain that gives us encouragement. And we are aware that we have an inheritance that is imperishable, that's saved for us in heaven, as 1 Peter says, that is beyond anything here that can be taken away from us or can be lost. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. What is the sleep of death? Could be a spiritual death. Enlighten my eyes, come through for me, show me something, talk to me, Lord. Otherwise, I might die spiritually. I might die spiritually. Or I might die emotionally. Some people say, I feel numb, I feel dead. Or I may actually get so depressed that I may think about suicide. Something comes before suicide, and that's what we call death wishes, where people say, like, it would be easier if I was dead. I wish I wasn't here. I wish I didn't wake up in the morning. If I didn't get up in the morning, it would be okay. Is it possible that that's what David was talking about? Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Basically, he's just telling God, I'm dying here, Lord. I am dying here, Lord. Lest my enemies say I have prevailed against him, lest those who trouble me rejoice when I am moved. He is feeling defeated. He is feeling defeated. And he's saying, my enemies are going to gloat over me. Satan is winning, Lord. Right now. He has me exactly where he wants me. When in reality, when we are standing before God, when we are opening our Bibles, we see promises and verses like, do not rejoice over me, my enemy, for when I fall, I will rise up, and when I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. There's promises like, no weapon formed against you shall prosper. So we know and we are reminded of how victorious we are through the power of God. That's what we have when we open this and we spend time in his word. And then the last part of the psalm says, but I have trusted in your mercy, or another translation is, but I've trusted in your unfailing love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord because he has dealt bountifully with me. Quite a turning point, right? Quite a turning point. David, you just said that you felt perpetually forgotten, right? That you felt forsaken. You felt like God was hiding his face. How is it that God has dealt bountifully with you? How is it that you're ready to sing? What caused the change? As far as we know from the psalm, do we know that anything changed? Does it look like anything changed in 6 verses? What changed? The mood has completely flipped, right? Why? Why? Because this is what being in the presence of God does. This is what being in the presence of the Lord does. This is what it does to us. He takes away our feelings of defeat and he gives us feelings of hope and victory. He takes away, our brokenness and he restores us. He takes away our, grief and he gives us comfort. We are reminded as we are talking to him of his presence throughout, all of our life. When David says, I will trust in your unfailing love, what do you think he was talking about? I will trust in your unfailing love. Where did he see this unfailing love? Where did he see it? One is he's seen it in his own life before. He's seen it in his own life before, and as he stands before God, God reminds him of that. And two, he's reminded of God's unfailing love that he has read about in scriptures. There's several Psalms, around the 100, 105, 107, that area. There's several Psalms where he is just telling and talking about God's dealings with his people throughout ages and generation and decades and centuries. So we are reminded of God's unfailing love when we look at this. We're reminded that he was there with Daniel in the lion's den, that he was there with the 3 youth in the fiery furnace, that he opened the Red Sea in front of his people so that whatever obstacles are before us, they can move. We're reminded that he told us if you have faith as small as a mustard seed, you can move mountains. We're reminded of his unfailing love that he has shown his people throughout generations, and David does that a lot in his Psalms. He's not unaware of what God has done before him. And also, he is aware and is reminded of what God has done with him in the past. Just start out sometimes, just give a section of your prayers to thanksgiving and to praise. And just stand before God and just say, I thank you for. And just let yourself be. You will see the amount of things that he reminds you that you have to be thankful for. We just need to stand in his presence to have that eternal perspective changed. So we talked about David, we talked about Job. There's also a story in that's similar about Hannah. Hannah's the mother of who? Mother of who? Who? Samuel. Just thank you. So Hannah's story starts in 1 Samuel chapter 1. That she was married to a man named Elkanah, and Elkanah had 2 wives. Hannah was the nicer one of the 2. The other one was kind of mean, and she was mean to Hannah. And Hannah could not conceive. She could not have any children. And at the time, that brought a lot of shame. So if you open up your Bible to 1 Samuel chapter 1, verse 5, you'll see that it says words like, the Lord had closed her womb. Her rival also provoked her severely to make her miserable. So she was miserable because the Lord had closed her womb. So it was year by year when she went up to the house of the Lord that she provoked her. Therefore she wept and did not eat. So Hannah was miserable, she wept, she did not eat. In verse 10, again we're in 1 Samuel chapter 1. It says she went to the tabernacle. So again, what did she do? Where did she take it? She took it to God. So it says in verse 10, and she was in bitterness of soul and prayed to the Lord and wept in anguish. All of this at the doorpost of the tabernacle. Then she made a vow and said, O Lord of hosts, you will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant. You will indeed look on the affliction of your maidservant, and remember me and not forget your maidservant, but will give your maidservant a male child. Then I will give him to the Lord all the days of his life, and no razor shall come upon his head. She spent so much time in the tabernacle looking like she was talking to herself. So Eli, the priest, he saw her kind of mumbling and talking to herself. And so he thought she was, what? Anybody know the story? He thought she was drunk. And so he just told her basically like, hey lady, give up that booze that you're drinking, like he's like, stay away from the wine. And she tells him in verse 15, she says, "No, my lord, I'm a woman of sorrowful spirit. I have drunk neither wine nor intoxicating drink, but have poured out my soul before the Lord. Do not consider your maidservant a wicked woman, for out of the abundance of my complaint and grief, out of the abundance of my complaint and grief, I have spoken until now." Lament. This is an example of lament, going to God out of the abundance of her complaint and grief. And Eli answered and said to her, "Go in peace, and the God of Israel grant your petition, which you have asked of him." So he just told her, Yani, go, Rabbina ma'aki yan. Rabbina ma'aki, Rabbina ydilik. And she said, "Let your maidservant find favor in your sight." So the woman went her way and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Again, what changed for her face to no longer be sad? She just spent time with God. She spent time pouring out her heart to God. So spending time with God is the changing thing. And I really want everybody to ask themselves, what is it that I do when I am in pain, when I'm in discomfort, when I'm in suffering, when I'm disillusioned, when I'm jaded, when I'm angry? Where is it that I go? Where is it that I go? Do I go to my phone? Do I text friends? Do I shut down? Do I go to some way of numbing myself? Some kind of addictive behavior or whatever it is? Or do I go and I take it to God? Let's compare really quickly Psalm 13 with Psalm 57 and Psalm 142. Let's go to Psalm 142 first, because it's shorter. It's also 7 verses. I want you to see the same pattern of what David is doing here. Psalm 142. Everybody got it? Psalm 142. You have a phone, right? Can you look it up? Psalm 142. Everybody got it? Okay. "I cry out to the Lord with my voice, and actually it says at the top of the psalm, it says a contemplation of David, a prayer when he was in the cave. This is where he ran from Saul. "I cry out to the Lord with my voice to the Lord I make my supplication. I pour out my complaint before him. I declare before him my trouble. When my spirit was overwhelmed within me, then you knew my path. In the way in which I walk, they have secretly set a snare for me. Look on my right hand and see, for there is no one who acknowledges me. Refuge has failed me. No one cares for my soul. I cried out to you, O Lord. I said, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Attend to my cry, for I am brought very low. Deliver me from my persecutors, for they are stronger than I. Bring my soul out of prison." Again, was he in a physical prison? No. He was just feeling trapped. "Bring my soul out of prison, that I may praise your name. The righteous shall surround me, for you shall deal bountifully with me." How does he know that God will deal bountifully with him? How does he know? Just standing before God, just being in the Word of God reminds us of everything that God truly is. That he is righteous, that he is faithful, that he has never left us, that he has never failed us, that he meets every need, that he is my provider, that he is my shepherd. I am reminded all of that just by being in his presence. So that's Psalm 142. This is what David said at his lowest point. And very close to finishing, Psalm 57. Starts out in the beginning, "Be merciful to me, O God, be merciful to me, for my soul trusts in you. And in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed." Okay, "in the shadow of your wings I will make my refuge until these calamities have passed." Do you know what calamities means? What? Like musibah. Until all these masayib have passed. Catastrophes. I will cry out to God Most High, to God who performs all things for me. Do you see how he is reminded of who God is? He shall send from heaven and save me. He reproaches the one who would swallow me up. God shall send forth his mercy and his truth. My soul is among lions. I lie among the sons of men who are set on fire, whose teeth are spears and arrows, and their tongue is a sharp sword. And then, quick switch, he's like, I'm in trouble. Trouble surrounds me everywhere. I'm in danger. And then quick switch. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be above all the earth. And then he says, complains again. They have prepared a net for my steps. My soul is bowed down. They have dug a pit for me. Into the midst of it they themselves have fallen. And then he says, all of a sudden peace from God comes over him. And he says, my heart is steadfast, O God. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and give praise. Awake, my glory. Awake, lute and harp. These are his instruments. He's ready to sing. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing to you among the nations, for your mercy reaches to the heavens and your truth into the clouds. Do you see the pattern here in the 3 Psalms? Okay, so just a quick summary on what to do when we want to lament, when we are in a bad place. And instead of running away from God, we start to run to God. The first thing to do is direct your conversation to God. God is interested in every feeling that you have. God is interested in every emotion that you go through. God is interested in every circumstance that is happening in your life. Because every circumstance that you're going through can lead to your salvation or it can lead to your destruction. Can bring you closer to him or it can bring you further from him. So God is interested in all the details of your life. So direct your conversation to God. The second part is describe your suffering and your pain to him. Don't say, he knows. Sometimes we shut down before God. And we just say, well, he knows. Or sometimes somebody says, well, why should I tell him? He's the one who did this to me. Describe your pain and your suffering to him. David used to tell him, why do you hide yourself in times of trouble? How long, O Lord, will you forget me? And then depend on Christ for your help and your hope. David sometimes would tell him, arise, O Lord, why do you sleep? Hope in God, for I will yet praise him. Depend on Christ for your help and your hope. And lastly, dwell on God's faithfulness and his character. If you're gonna go quickly through that list, spend a lot of time dwelling on his faithfulness and his character and his goodness. I think my microphone is telling me time is up. Spend time in God's presence. Spend time in God's presence. Spend time in God's word. David says things like, you have turned my mourning into dancing. You have turned my mourning into dancing. Sorrow may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. Sorrow may last for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I read this little quote that's easy to remember and just so important. It says, it's not time that heals all pain, right? There's a saying that says time heals everything. It's not time that heals all pain. It's time with God that heals all pain. It's time with God that heals all pain. So pour out your heart to him. Take your suffering and your pain to him, and he will transform it into praise and thanksgiving, because he will put things into perspective. Thank you, guys.